So join Andrew and Guess in an hour, but first on BBC One, it's time to join David Dimbleby.
Welcome to Question Time, which tonight comes from the debating chamber of the Oxford Union. And on our panel, the Conservative Work and Pensions Secretary, Damian Green, Labour's former Shadow Defence Secretary, Clive Lewis, for the Liberal Democrats, Jo Swinson, who was Business and Equalities Minister in the coalition, the SNP's Europe spokesman, Stephen Gethins, and the journalist and former policy advisor to David Cameron, now in the House of Lords as a non-affiliated peer, Camilla Cavendish. Thank you very much. And in this first programme since the announcement of a general election, you can, of course, join in the debate from home. You can either do it on Facebook or Twitter, or you can use text 83981, push that red button to see what others are saying. Our first question tonight from Priscilla Fisher, please. Priscilla Fisher.
Has the general election been called for the benefit of the Conservative Party and not the country?
Has the election been called for the benefit of the Conservative Party, not the country, Clive Lewis?
Yes, quite clearly it has. I don't... And I'm quite pleased to say that I voted against it, because I think it's a very cynical ploy. She's gone into this election, the Prime Minister, having said 11 times before that she wouldn't call an early general election. And what she's worked out is that her chaotic plan on Brexit and the policies that she and her government have embarked upon since 2010 mean that, with the internal dissent within her own party, she needs to go to the polls now. And I think most people in this country will see it as a cynical, manipulative ploy to try to maximise on what she's doing, when actually what she needs to be doing is bringing this country together in one of the most chaotic and I think undermining situations that we have seen as a country in the post-war period. She's not doing that. It's divisive, and I think, quite simply, she's out of line.
So why didn't you get your whole party to vote against it?
I think the decision that my own party made to go and vote for this was wrong, and I went through a different lobby to them. But I understand why, because when Theresa May and the policies that she is putting forward, day in, day out, as many MPs, many on this table will know, they're having a devastating impact on our communities. In Norwich South, I see people coming in every week telling me about the hardship that they're in, about the difficulties in the NHS, about the homelessness that people face, the hardship. And my party felt, and Jeremy Corbyn, the leadership and the Shadow Cabinet felt, that we had to take Theresa on if she offered this opportunity.
But he was wrong.
I think that what we should have done is that we should have said to Theresa May, if you want to be so manipulative, then we'll quite happily vote for you, but in a vote of no confidence in your own government. And if you want this election badly enough, then vote against yourself.
OK. Jo Swinson.
Well, yes, this election has been called for the benefit of the Conservative Party. As I think it was said to Theresa May, you know, what part of the 20-point lead in the polls made you think that calling an election would be something that would be good to do? But this is an election that can benefit the country. There are millions of people across the country who woke up on the 24th of June last year devastated that Britain had voted to leave the EU and have looked on in horror as events have unfolded since. There are also millions of people who voted leave, but who didn't vote for Theresa May's hard Brexit, which includes leaving the single market and wrecking the economy. And so there's plenty of people who look at politics, see that it's broken, see a Conservative government that has just gone for the hardest of all Brexits and have been able to get away with it because, frankly, the opposition in the Labour Party has been hopeless. So this is the chance to change the country, to get a much better deal for the country and to have an opposition that can actually hold this hard Brexit government to account.
I'll come to you in a moment. Damian Green.
I find it quite extraordinary to have opposition politicians saying, oh, the government's terrible, but we don't want an election. We don't want the people to decide whether the government's any good or not. It's exactly what you said, Clive. You went into an attack, but then said, but I didn't want an election, which is absurd.
But didn't you pass a law saying it wouldn't be till 2020?
Well, Parliament passed a law. The Prime Minister was quite straight about this. She didn't disguise anything. She said she changed her mind for two reasons. First of all, because the Brexit process, it was Joe's leader, Tim Farron, who said he was going to gum up Parliament, he was going to grind the government down, and there's 100 peers, Lib Dem peers in the House of Lords who could do that. So they would make the Brexit process chaotic. And secondly, there is... I love it the way nobody is allowed a word in edgeways when they all get together. It's the coalition of chaos made flesh, these three.
It's this government which is delivering chaos.
Absolutely. The point is also that there is actually a window where you can have that now, because the European Union has gone away to think about its negotiating tactics. So we can have an election now, and out of this election, if people vote Conservative, if we have a Conservative government returned under Theresa May, we will then have a stronger and more stable government that will get the best deal for Britain in these vital Brexit negotiations. I can't overstress the importance. We need a good deal for Britain. We need a strong and stable government under Theresa May to get that deal for Britain.
Can I just pick up on this? Look, I relish the opportunity to do my bit to get rid of a Tory government and the damage that they have done. But I'll tell you this. We had an EU referendum to try and sort out a Tory civil war. We're now having a general election to try and sort out a Tory civil war. And all the in time, we're having more chaos, more uncertainty for jobs and the economy.
What's the Tory civil war that's going on at the moment?
Well, if you looked at it, the only reason you don't see a Tory civil war going on is because the Labour one's much worse. But there's a hard Tory Brexit being driven by the hard right of the Conservative Party that's taken us out of the single market that will cost jobs, that's leaving us with no uncertainty over things like research funding, which is crucial in areas like Oxford and crucial in areas like I represent in St Andrews as well. People's jobs rely on this, and you're using it as a political tool to take advantage of the mess that they're in.
But hang on a second. Are you saying then that Theresa May wants a soft Brexit, and by getting a bigger majority that the polls suggest,
well, the problem
you're going to get a kind of Brexit you want? Is that what you're saying? The problem is, because we went through the gross irresponsibility of Vote Leave campaigning on a blank piece of paper, nobody's told us what kind of shape that leaving the EU will take. Now, there are jobs in the economy. Now, look, we'll debate this in Parliament. And do you know what, Damien? Having scrutiny in Parliament is a good thing. It's the point why we are here. It's the point why Joe's standing again, I'm standing again, Clive's standing again. It's a good thing, and it makes for better governance. Now, wait a minute. The SNP is
a good thing.
Okay, just hang on a second. I'm going to get a lot of hands up in the audience. Let's go. I'll come to you, Camilla, in a moment. I said I'd go to you at the very back there first, and let's hear what you all think.
One of the benefits of this election is that, as of the 9th of June, we actually stand a fighting chance of a process of getting an opposition leader who is credible and stands a chance of winning in 2025. Or 5 years from now, 2022, because it certainly won't be happening under Corbyn.
What, so you think the election's achievement will be that Corbyn will resign?
Stand down as of the 9th. It will be a disaster in the polls. We might get an effective opposition leader.
What makes you think he would resign if he were defeated?
I think it's a foregone conclusion, isn't it?
I don't know. I'm asking you. Let me go up there to the woman in the back row. You.
Why was the general election not called before Article 50 was triggered?
Yeah.
Camilla Cavendish.
So I'm going to make myself quite unpopular, I think. I'm going to come back to your question and say that I actually think it's both. I mean, clearly the election is for the benefit of the Conservative Party. Anybody with a 20-point lead. Political parties are cynical, vote-winning machines. You know, she's going to capitalise on that. But I have been really worried that we would put ourselves in a position where the government of the day was going to be focusing from 2019 onwards on winning the next election, just at the time when they would need to be properly negotiating with the 27 other countries that we need to do a deal with, and that she would be under enormous pressure from her right wing, she's got quite a small majority, to do some things that I certainly wouldn't agree with, and I think she needs some more room to manoeuvre. That does not, and that's why I actually think it's a good thing if we can get a longer period to have this negotiation. That does not mean that I don't agree with Stephen that we absolutely need parliamentary scrutiny of that process at the same time. But I do think this is a unique election. This is a very dangerous moment for this country. We have a huge and important negotiation that I think transcends politics to some extent. I mean, we just need to get the best deal. It's very hard that half of it's going to be done behind closed doors, which is, it's very hard to get your head around. But I do think that having a bit more time might give us a better chance as a country.
I'll come back to you. OK, you say... Joe, hold the point and I'll come to you. The man there in blue, yes.
Me?
Yep.
For months, people have complained about Theresa May not having a mandate for a hard Brexit. But now she's gone to get a mandate. People like Clive Lewis are still complaining. When will Theresa May win?
OK, and you say in the front here.
I think Tim Farron brought up an interesting point at PMQs a couple of days ago, that the legacy of this parliament will be the absence of an effective opposition. And I think maybe the Labour Party needs to thank Theresa May for calling the election, because if nothing else, it'll sort out the mess that is in the Labour Party, because we need the Labour Party working and functioning as it should be, an effective opposition, if that is where it is going to be.
Do you agree with him?
No, I don't agree with him. I'm shaking my head, no.
I thought you were nodding your head.
No, I'm saying no. Can I just come back to a couple of points? Just very quickly.
Come back to his point.
No,
take his point, it was made up there too. We'll save the Labour Party if you're defeated.
Respectfully disagree with the gentleman. And I find it interesting that if Theresa May wanted a mandate, she was busy, the Conservative Party were busy telling us after the referendum, when they were interpreting what that result meant, that the British people had spoken. She had that mandate, and when she became Prime Minister, unelected, that's when she should have called the election. And I find it laughable that you would say, Damien, that you've called the election because 9 Liberal Democrat MPs who voted 3 different ways in Article 50 are the opposition that are going to stop the Brexit negotiations. I find, frankly, laughable.
It's much more likely in the House of Lords. I said that.
This is less about one nation toys and more about having a one-party state. That's actually what you want in this country.
I think being accused of having a one-party state when you just called an election is just absurd. This is a democratic process. And interestingly, the one thing I haven't heard, I campaigned on the Remain side. I was on the board of Stronger In, so nobody fought harder for Remain. But unlike the impression I'm getting here, I'm a Democrat. I accept the result of that referendum. What's important now is to get on with the best Brexit that we can have, to have a prosperous Britain.
But you've already ruled that out, Damien. You've already ruled that out. I mean, you were on the Remain side. You must be looking at what's happening with dismay. You know, Theresa May standing there and saying, well, before we even talk to our European counterparts, we're going to rule out being in the single market. We're not even going to try and see if that's possible. Surely to have that trade without all of those barriers, without all of those costs on businesses trying to export, that is, if you are going to say let's make the best possible Brexit, try and bring the country together after a divisive...
Brexit at all. We've got to respect the view. I mean, we fought, we lost.
But my point is you're not
respecting
the
view of the people.
You're not even doing that, though, because you're already ruling out what would be the best version of Brexit.
All right,
let's
come. Okay, they've got a lot of hands up.
Market.
Let's respect our audience and hear from them as well. But briefly, Stephen,
Look, the SNP has been described as an effective opposition. But on another point, Damien talks about fearing the House of Lords. The House of Lords is a democratic abomination, and it will have absolutely no impact on the House of Lords after this general election. It'll still be there, it'll still be unelected, and it'll still have an impact on each and every one of us. But why not scrap it?
Because I voted for a fully democratically elected House of Lords when it came up a couple of parliaments ago. It is not for the government to abolish Houses of Parliament. It's for Parliament to do that. But what is important is that we have a strong and stable government to get the deal. We can argue about what type of deal we want, but it seems to me unarguable that if you have a strong elected Prime Minister with a new elected mandate, Britain's position will be put better in those vital negotiations.
You, sir, in the middle there. Yes. Yes, you're waving at me. Yep.
Yes, so if we're going to have an election, can we at least have a grown-up election? I bet my wife £10 that Damien Lewis would say coalition of chaos and strong and stable government in his first contribution.
Would that be Damien Lewis or Clive Green you were talking about?
I'm flattered to be compared with Damien Lewis.
Has he called the repetitive cliché virus off his boss? Please, let's have a more grown-up debate where we use the language of Shakespeare with a
All right,
bit
hold on.
more
OK, the woman in the third row there, you.
The general public were upset when Theresa May got into power unelected. Now there is an election, everyone still seems to be upset because apparently she's being manipulative. How does she stand a chance to please anyone?
Yeah.
OK. And you, sir, here. Yes, you, sir.
The chaos we're looking at today, and I'm not Damien Green, but it identifies exactly what we shouldn't be doing in this election. We do need a unified front, and I do believe that Labour has some very good candidates. Clive is in front of us today, and there are others. And it shouldn't be Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm sorry, I don't get your point. It shouldn't be what?
The Labour leader should not necessarily be Jeremy Corbyn going forward.
OK. And you next in here.
I think at the end of the day, you're asking people to vote on uncertainties. This whole Brexit thing, we don't know what we're going into. We don't know what we're voting on. We don't know what sort of agreement we're going to get. We've got 2 years to negotiate. We don't know if we'll be able to negotiate the sort of deal we want. So how can you ask people to vote on something that they just don't know, essentially?
So you'd rather it had waited for 3 years?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the alternative is. I just think this is the total wrong time to be calling a general election.
OK. And you on the gangway there, up there, the woman there.
I mean, how will the government's apparent lack of clarity on the Brexit demands affect how people vote? How do they think it won't affect how people vote? People who've had confidence in the Tories in the first place, we've had no clarity.
So you don't know what you're voting for, you mean?
No. And so why would you not tactically vote? Why would a coalition of chaos, so to speak, why would that not be a better alternative?
OK, well, I'm going to thank you. That's a good point, which I'd like to get Simon Fisher's question on exactly that, if I can, please. Simon Fisher.
Is tactical voting undemocratic or the only way to prevent a hard Brexit?
Is tactical voting for a party other than your natural allegiance? Tony Blair was saying it may mean some Labour people voting Tory this time round. Is that undemocratic, or is it the way to prevent a hard Brexit? Jo Swinson.
Well, we have the first-past-the-post voting system, which some people would say can produce results which don't necessarily look like they are respecting the will of the overall democracy. Case in point, in the 2015 general election, half of the people in Scotland voted SNP, but 56 of the 59 seats went SNP. So many people in Scotland really felt that they were not being properly represented. And I think there will be a lot of tactical voting this time round in Scotland and indeed south of the border. And it is up to individuals to decide how to cast their vote. And for many people, avoiding a hard Brexit is going to be a top priority because they can see the chaos coming down the line. I mean, Damien Green talks about the coalition of chaos, and it's actually the pursuit of this hard Brexit that is creating such chaos. And it's the Liberal Democrats that are really clearly saying this can be avoided. We have this election. It's an opportunity to vote for something else. And this is the chance to send the message to Theresa May.
Camilla Cavendish.
Well, I think tactical voting is perfectly democratic, especially because it's the only way sometimes you can break out of the tyranny of safe seats. And there are a lot of people in this country who feel it's not worth voting at all because, you know, wherever they live has always been the same way. So there's nothing wrong with tactical voting at all. I'm not quite sure, though, that we have a coalition of chaos. It's clear it's not a coalition at all, because actually none of you entirely agree with each other, I don't think.
Well, no coalitions.
I think just to go back to the lady here who made the point about uncertainty, I mean, I think what most of us would value as voters is just much more clarity from each party about exactly what the choices are, both going into Brexit and coming out of it. Because there are some things we don't know, because it's all subject to 27 other countries. But I would really like to see a bit more vision beyond Brexit. What are we talking about? What are you offering? What do you want this country to look like?
Okay, the man up there in the striped jacket, yes, below it.
I was just wondering about the fact that the stated aim of Mrs May was that she wanted Parliament to come together, or Westminster to come together, because the country has come together. The country is currently very, very divided.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to sort that question out. So where you were saying about we have to widen this beyond Brexit, yes, we do. But we have to address all of those issues. We have to start addressing them in the debate, rather than just saying it's this or that, because along party lines.
Because it was...
Get your heads together, because it is the biggest issue that we've got.
Damien Green, it was the Prime Minister who said that the country was united, but Parliament wasn't. But what's the evidence that the country is united on this?
Well, the country went through a vote last year, and I think the most divisive thing we're hearing this evening is the constant repetition of hard Brexit. And for those also who quite reasonably say, you know, what are you about? What clarity do you want? Read the Prime Minister's Lancaster House speech, in which she set out in as much detail as you can before you go into a negotiation what she wanted to achieve with Brexit, which included a key phrase where she said she wanted a close and special partnership with the European Union. I think the sensible position for Britain, to take Camilla's point about where do we want to be at the end of this process, is that we will be outside the European Union. That's what the British people voted for. You know, and we obviously accept that. But obviously, it's still one of our largest trading areas. They are neighbouring friendly democracies. We want to have a close partnership with them from the outside. Now, that doesn't mean being a member of the single market, because that would involve accepting the European Court of Justice. And I think one of the lessons we all had to take from the referendum was that's an unacceptable interference in the democracy of this country. People wanted more control over immigration to this country, and people wanted us to have more control over our own budget. So within those parameters, then what we want to do is negotiate a deal that makes trade flow as freely as possible, and that preserves our friendship and our cooperation on things like security. But that seems to me a very, very sensible and strong vision of Britain's future. And if we can achieve that, we will have achieved a lot.
Do you expect, though, on the tactical voting, the people who voted, who were in the 48%, like you, who voted to remain, will abandon the Conservative Party and go for other parties, the Liberal Democrats, or Labour, or in Scotland, your party?
Why the other parties?
Why would they vote for you if they're against it? Why would they vote for you?
Well, I was against it, but as I say, I accept the Prime Minister was against it, but we accept.
Yeah, but you accept. But you've seen the polling shows that people who voted that way don't accept it. They still feel as they did.
Funnily enough, most people haven't changed their mind very much over the year.
But if anything, the latest switch was that people have moved from Brexiteers to remain.
That was 2%. So
but it was a poll.
It's just not moving very much. And I think, frankly, polls are overrated. I'm struck by people assuming
there's 20%. You're nervous now.
Because I've seen, we saw the Trump election, we saw the referendum vote itself. We've seen polls get things wrong. So nobody, there are people assuming the result of the election. They absolutely shouldn't do this.
Okay.
And the tactical vote. Sorry, one more last point, and then I'll shut up for a bit. The tactical voting point is. Fine, obviously, it's a free country, you can vote tactically. But have in your mind that if you're voting tactically, what you might wake up with on June the 10th is Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. Do you really want that?
Stephen Gettins.
On the point, Joe mentioned earlier on that the SNP did well this election, not in past elections, on the current system. Look, I'm in favour of proportional representation. This next Parliament is going to be very, very important in terms of our rights, the environment, what kind of UK emerges from leaving the European Union. Now, actually, I'm going to say something, is that actually maybe it's no bad thing forcing politicians from different parties to work together. I was only elected 2 years ago, and one thing I've noticed with the Europe portfolio is I've had to, and I've wanted to, try and work with colleagues in the Liberal Democrats and Labour and in the Green Party on areas where we agree, like trying to keep EU nationals here, trying to maintain research funding, trying to fight against austerity. I think when you get one party in control, like the Tories on just 36% of the vote, you end up in a mess. Not all of us have all the answers. And that's why it's good that you reach across the political aisle where you possibly can and reach agreement. And Westminster needs to get better at that.
Well,
No, it's Clive's turn. Clive Lewis, are you in favour of tactical voting? You appear to be voting tactically by not confronting Caroline Lucas, the Green in Brighton. You approve of that? Is that happening?
Well, I think people have always voted tactically. People, I think the electorate understand what they want to achieve under the first past the post system, and they can vote accordingly. I think where the Green Party, they've stood down in Rupert Huck's seat in Ealing, and I believe they may also have stood down in Brighton, Kemp Town. And I applaud that, because actually that's a grown-up politics where they understand that actually what's at stake here in this general election, potentially one of the most important general elections in the post-war period, goes beyond and transcends party politics. And I think they should be applauded for what they've done personally. However, I also understand that as a national party, the Labour Party, understands that in this election, it is about Brexit, it underlies everything. But it's also about the future of the national healthcare system. It's also about the future of education in this country. Yeah. It's also about the future of social care. There are other issues here at stake. And I think people have to vote accordingly and think about that very carefully. And obviously in Norwich South, people will be voting, I think, many people will vote tactically. They understand in Norwich South that after me, there's a Conservative candidate who will push through Theresa May's hard Brexit. So they've got a clear choice. But they can vote for a Labour MP and try to stop that.
You praise the Liberal Democrats for not standing against the Greens. Would you like to see Labour not stand against the Greens? Would you like to see Labour not stand against the Liberal Democrats in certain seats?
I think the problem there is that the Labour Party, the problem there is that the Labour Party is a national party and we stand in every seat and we always have. In the future, though, I think, I personally also believe in proportional representation and we have a first-past-the-post system. And I think it's an ugly political system. It's an immature political system from the 19th century. I think we need to change it. And I think we need to give people real choice in who their politicians are and what their politics are. And I think it'll make for a better politics in this country.
You sit up there.
Clive, and I agree with Clive that he just mentioned that it's more than just Brexit. Yet then why is he shying away by not voting in favour of the general election so Labour can bring forward their ideas in order to improve healthcare and social care? If he wanted to have that implemented within our country, then why is he not voting for a general election straight away?
Okay. No. I want one. No, you can do what you like in a moment. There are a lot of hands up. The woman there in purple. Yes.
Thank you. I suppose going back to what Damien just said, I get really frustrated when I hear politicians and anyone actually talking about the people. I feel like Theresa May and the government are kind of going on this grand quest to sort of give the people what they asked for. And I did vote Remain, but I accept that not everyone did. But actually, in fact, the people that voted Brexit only make up 30% of the electorate. And I think that people forget this, and they're on a sort of arrogant quest, trying to impress these people that think that they're trying to impress.
30% if you don't count. I mean, if you include people who didn't vote, which is...
If you include people who didn't vote,
you don't
and
know
that's
how the
not
people
including...
who didn't vote were going to vote, though, did you?
Yes, no, sure. But that doesn't include children, that doesn't include babies who are going to be affected more than people that are going to slope off this earth.
Okay. Okay. And I'll take one more point from you, sir, just in front there, yes.
Yeah, I can't understand the Theresa May's position here, because she's called a general election that she clearly doesn't want to participate in herself. And
why do you say that?
Well, because she's not wanting to do a debate. She's standing back from... She's standing back from doing all but minimal TV interviews. And as far as I can see, the Tories want to talk about two things. They want to talk about Brexit. We had a referendum on Brexit last year. And the other thing they want to do is just throw abuse at Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah. I haven't heard a single... haven't heard a single policy on healthcare, on education, on welfare, on immigration from the Conservatives. It's just that they want to focus on Brexit again, and they want to throw mud at Jeremy Corbyn.
Be brief, if you would.
Two very quick points.
No debates.
Well, you will see an awful lot. Teresa's actually been campaigning around the country, meeting people in workplaces and so on.
But he's talking about debates, Jeremy Corbyn.
Huge numbers of big TV interviews.
The difference between an interview and a debate, isn't there? Look, here, you're debating, right? There are 5 different opinions, right?
She will be...
If you and I were just talking to each other, that's not a debate.
But we would be
it's me asking you questions.
We would be talking to the audience, and she'll be doing that as well.
But that doesn't count,
And the second point, do wait...
Okay, you've given that point away. Why won't you do a debate?
You can contain yourself... Can I talk about the manifesto point? Because he said that this gentleman said there are no policies. Do wait for our manifesto. It's coming out in about 10 days' time. and that will satisfy your desire for policies for the future.
You called the election, so surely you should be able to get your policies out before Labour did.
Okay. Okay. Let's. Yeah, go on.
Just make a point on this. I really am really disappointed that she has not agreed to do a TV debate because she is making this election partly about strong leadership, and she should get out there and cut through the media, because the great thing about a TV debate is you're not being translated all the time by the newspapers. You can talk direct to the public and say what you think. She should get out there and she should take on Jeremy Corbyn, and she should do that now.
Why do you think she won't?
She said.
Well, the politicians here would know better than me. I think politicians are always reluctant to put themselves in that position. She does every week. No, sorry, Damien, it's not the same. I mean, TV debates are not perfect, but we've now got used to them. People expect them. And as I said, she is putting herself forward as a strong leader, and she should have the courage to just come and do the debate.
Okay, you say.
I really think there's a lack of clarity from Theresa May, and I've lost all confidence in the Conservative Party over the last 6 months.
Over the last?
Well, over the Brexit negotiations, it's just, you know, calling this general election, I've lost all confidence in the Conservatives.
Okay. Well, let's take one issue that is going to come up, or may come up. Robert Harris, please. Robert Harris.
Why haven't the main political parties promised to end the rank betrayal of my generation that is the triple lock on pensions?
In other words, you think the pensioners are benefiting at your expense, at the expense of your future?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to link pensions to average earnings, to inflation. It makes no sense to commit to a minimum annual increase of 2.5%, regardless of what is going on in the actual economy, producing a constant ratcheting up of costs. And at a time when the average pensioner household is better off than the average working household, it's my generation that's having to foot the bill, and it's my generation that's going to have to wait longer and longer to receive our pensions as the government tries to keep the cost of pensions under control.
Do you anticipate it may be dropped in the Tory manifesto?
Well, I hope it will be. We'll hear from Damien, I hope. But
yeah, he's the boss of this bit.
He is. It has absolutely no logic. It's got no basis in equity. It's a cynical attempt by the parties to attract a certain demographic, and it really needs to be scrapped.
You're just out for the old vote, Damien Green.
I genuinely think that's unfair. And can I break all the rules of pre-election question times by being non-partisan for a bit? To put in perspective, and first of all, for young people will grow old and will want a decent pension system one day. So I think this sort of dichotomy of either you care about the old or the young is wrong, that actually young people grow old as well. But more importantly, the triple lock and the action on pensions that have been taken over the past 30 years by all parties, not just my party, but when we were in coalition with the Lib Dems, and before that with other parties in government, have meant a tremendous reduction in pensioner poverty in this country. In the 70s and 80s, 40% of pensioners in this country lived in poverty. That was disgraceful. We've got that figure now right down to 14%. Still too high, there's more to do, but that is a completely unrecorded, huge social achievement in this country. We have done an awful lot in a generation to get rid of pensioner poverty, and we should be proud of that. And sorry, the final point...
Answer Robert Harris. Let him just answer you. Put it that way round. Robert Harris.
Sorry. Well, that's absolutely true, and it is obviously crucially important to reduce pensioner poverty. But like I was saying, the average pensioner household now is better off than the average working household. Yeah. So when there's a trade-off between the two, the current system, where you commit, regardless of what is happening in the actual economy, that's got to be unfair.
Clive Lewis, what's your view on it?
With all due respect, I think the WASPy women in this country would disagree with you most strongly on that. This isn't about a race to the bottom. I'm proud that pensioners in this country are given a decent pension. There are still 2 million of them that live in pensioner poverty. But they've worked all their lives. They deserve to be looked after. They deserve that pension. And I think it's right and proper that the triple lock is there. And Labour have said, we will guarantee that. I think that's right. I think it's the right thing to do. But what I think rather than play the older generation against the younger generation, what politicians should be doing is saying, how do we actually tackle those who have vast amounts of wealth? We're one of the most unequal countries in the Western world. So I know where I would be looking to make sure that pensioners had the money that they needed to live decently, and also that young people had opportunities and chances in this life. And that's by taking it from those with the most wealth. And unfortunately, there are far too many people with far too much wealth in this country, and that's what a future Labour government would do. It would equalise that out and make sure we had a fair society that worked for all.
The woman at the back there. Yes.
I have a lot of sympathy with the questioner there, but I've got a piece of advice as well, which is that his generation needs to get out and vote, and they'll find that a lot of the benefits will start accruing to them.
But you mean that's a very cynical view. You mean that if his lot voted, he'd change his mind? He wouldn't be looking for the...
A lot of the benefits that accrue to pensioners, because we all know that pensioners get out and vote.
All right. Have you decided whether you're going to keep the triple lock?
Wait for our manifesto. I'm going to keep saying that.
I didn't ask you what was in your manifesto. I said, have you decided?
No, everything is under discussion. I'm not going to discuss the process of the manifesto either. I'd love to do this. It would make life easier. People wouldn't boo. But I'm afraid we will release our manifesto when we release our manifesto, and you can see it all then.
OK. Jo Swinson.
Well, I think it sounds like Robert, who asked the question, will be happy with the Conservative manifesto on this, but probably less happy with my answer. So it was the Liberal Democrats who actually brought forward the triple lock. It was our policy that made it into the coalition agreement and that we delivered, because over a period of many years, the state pension had fallen so far behind what average working households were taking home. And pensioners will remember the insult under the Labour government of the 75 pence a week rise. So it was clear that something did have to be done about that. And I think that making sure that there is dignity in retirement is important. Now, I think there are arguments about what you can do about, very excessive, tax relief on high-rate tax relief for people putting into their pension pots. I think there's things that could be done, but the basic state pension is about dignity in retirement. And so I don't think that the Conservatives dithering on this is actually helpful. But you're right to talk about working age people too, because this isn't just about people at one end of the age spectrum. And what we've seen under this government have been, frankly, cruel cuts in welfare on people who are struggling to make ends meet, who are going out and working hard. These are, frankly, the cuts that we spent 5 years in coalition stopping them making and absolutely minimised. No, we vetoed the £12 billion of cuts, the tax credits and the universal credit. And you know what? You really should be thinking twice when you are having to get officials to design an 8-page form for mothers who have experienced sexual assault and are in distress to fill in to affirm that their child is the product of rape in order to make sure that they can get enough money to feed their children. When you're having to design a form like that, you know your policy is wrong.
The workplace pension scheme was brought in, which was a brilliant idea to help actually young people build up a pension for later on in life.
Okay. 7.5 million people are now using it. It's a great success.
Yeah. I think on the triple lock pension, and this is where I respectfully would disagree. Those who'd be impacted when the Tories go ahead with their plans to cut that, like so many things, will not be the richest pensioners, will actually be the poorest pensioners, will be those who are struggling to make ends meet. And this is where we're seeing some disgraceful practices. It's like the WASPy women, the pension inequality. These are women for whom that makes a big difference, and not being told that your pension is being cut. People were planning for their pensions for a long, long time, and the WASPy women have got a point, and that's exactly the sort of area where we should be pulling together and giving them the equality that they deserve.
You've got the power to do that in Scotland. Your government in Scotland can do that.
Do you know, I keep hearing this.
And didn't just want to whinge about it.
I keep hearing this from the Tories. I keep hearing this from the Tories. It's like the rape clause that Joe rightly brought up. That's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. And what we hear from the Tories is, oh, well, you can sort that out. That affects everybody. Secondly, the Scottish Government has put £300 million into offsetting some of the worst decisions that have been made by a Tory government, like getting rid of the bedroom tax.
Now, we can do that about pensions.
Well, on the
I'm
point
not quite
of
sure what it was.
pensions...
What was your point?
What was the point?
The Scottish
what do I
government...
have to offset, Damien? You've just told us you're not announced
The Scottish
anything yet.
government, which likes to complain about the fact that the pension age has been equalised, which is a sensible thing to do, and which was actually done as far back as 1995, but you make a big issue of this, but you know that you have the power in Scotland, if you say Scottish women of a certain age deserve higher pensions, you could pay those pensions.
Nonsense. Now,
you would
Damien,
much prefer to
women
whinge
were
about
planning
it
for
and
their
do
pensions.
something about
They
it.
received letters being told that they would receive their pensions by
do
certain
it.
dates,
You've got
and
the power.
they didn't. They
No, but
didn't,
sorry,
and it was an absolute
Stephen,
disgrace. And the
Stephen.
Scottish government has been going through times on the bedroom tax, on various other issues, cleaning up your mess.
Stephen,
Cleaning up your mess.
Well, I think, if I'm hearing him right, he's saying you could do something about pensions, but you choose not to.
Well, the Scottish government has had its budget cut. It'll have its budget cut by £2.9 billion. On the rape clause, do you know what the Tory answer was to the rape clause? No, it shouldn't matter, you can just offset that. Tell you what, this will make it easier. Why don't we just vote against the rape clause and get rid of it at Westminster, and it solves the problem for everybody in the United Kingdom?
Pensions. All right. OK. The man, a young man there, and it was a young man who asked the question over here. What's your view? Maybe it's completely different.
Well,
man there on the right.
Yeah, I'd just like to agree with Clive and also Joe and Stephen to extent. The fact is, since, I think, 2010, the number of people who are reliant on food banks has gone up from the tens of thousands to the millions. The number of people who are rough sleepers has doubled. And so everyone knows that Oxford obviously has a huge homelessness problem, a huge number of people who are really the most marginalised in our society. And if you go out and talk to them, they include pensioners, but they also include young people. The fact is, making it an intergenerational conflict is, I think, ignoring the point of the huge wealth inequalities in our country and the fact that no one is talking about it.
Have you spoken on this? Have you spoken? Camilla Cavendish.
Robert, how old are you? Can I ask you how old you are? So you've basically got student debt, you're having to pay rent, you probably will have, I don't know, how many more years before you can get on the housing ladder? 15,
Hang on,
20?
too many personal questions here.
No, I wasn't sure because you could be
No,
a lot
just
older.
say what you've got to say. You've heard
So,
what he said.
I think I agree with you. I mean, I think these are really difficult decisions. The triple lock at 2.5% is unsustainable given all the other demands on public spending. And there is a younger generation that are having to bear enormous burdens of debt and cuts. And I actually think, I know a lot of pensioners have suffered from low interest rates, so people who are dependent on savings, they really have genuinely suffered since the financial crisis. That is absolutely right. But if we move to a double lock, which would still index the pension to wages or prices, we wouldn't be getting rid of that. That would be still indexed. It would give you some guarantee. I think that would be an awful lot fairer.
OK. And no, I think we have to move on because it's 40 minutes. 40 minutes have gone. We're going to be, just let me say this, in Wigan next week, for those of you watching around Wigan, and Edinburgh the week after that. So do come and take part. The address and the number to ring, I'll give them at the end, are there. Right, a question, please, from Rosanna Mills. Rosanna Mills.
With tensions rising, should we be more concerned about Kim Jong-un or Donald Trump?
Trump or Kim Jong-un? With tensions rising, who is more concerning? Stephen Gethins.
Can't we be concerned about both of them? I think that you know, one thing that strikes me, and I heard Boris Johnson today, and you raise a really good point, trying to give the US government sort of almost carte blanche over how they deal with Syria. I mean, Syria and North Korea are extraordinarily complicated international situations. I'm not entirely sure Boris Johnson is the best person to be dealing with them as far as I'm concerned, but there you go. These are horribly complicated situations whereby simply advocating military action all the time doesn't work. What you need is to invest in a long-term peace strategy. The conflict in Syria, I know you didn't mention it, but I think it comes into it. The conflict in Syria has been going on for 6 years. That should shame all of us. I mean, that's not that far away. That's why we have a refugee crisis at the moment. When we've got Tories trying to block people out of the country, it's because you have a mess in Syria and a mess that we caused in Libya as well, which is causing lives. And this is something that should this should be the concern of each and every one of us. But that requires investment. It requires investment in international development, and I'm afraid that's over decades in terms of an investment. And I don't have a huge amount of confidence that, as this government is focused solely on dragging us out of the European Union, it will have the wherewithal to start tackling these problems sensibly.
But you answering a serious question, but it seems to be a different question from the one that was asked,
Well,
which was
okay.
about North Korea.
I think on the...
I mean, no
Yeah.
reason for you not to talk about Syria. Do you think, from your point of view, that we should take part if the Americans ask us in bombing Syria?
I don't think you should just because the Americans ask you to go and bomb somebody, no, I don't think you should just go and bomb them. I mean, we have a situation in Syria, it's multipolar. You have Turkish troops on the ground, Russian troops on the ground, American troops on the ground, and this vastly complicated situation. A few years ago, the government asked us to bomb one side, and then a couple of years ago, or last year, we were asked to bomb another side. Do you know, maybe the answer is not in just bombing people. Maybe the answer is bringing people round the table to talk about it and investing. We've invested in Bosnia, for instance, over the past 25 years. And it's only now, after that kind of decades-long commitment to that country, that you're seeing some progress towards the European Union. Ironically, we're encouraging them to join the European Union just as we turn our backs on it.
All right. Let me drag us back to North Korea. Clive Lewis.
I think the key difference between Donald Trump and Kim Il-jung, well, there are quite a few, but as far as I know it, Kim Il-jung isn't waiting there with his knife and fork to take over the NHS with his corporate colleagues in the United States if we get the hard Brexit that Theresa May and Damien wants to see. But to draw it back to foreign policy, I think on the issue of Kim Il-jung and North Korea, I'm deeply unhappy that we have someone like Donald Trump, a very thin-skinned individual, in the White House, on a hair-trigger issue with North Korea. And I think that we need a government, we need a foreign secretary and a prime minister that is prepared not just to suck up to the United States, but to stand up to them when needs be. And if you look at Syria, as has been mentioned, I think many people here, when they saw what happened in Syria, they understood that something very nasty, very bad had happened. And I understand people wanted to do something, and I get that, because that's what the British people are like. They embrace justice, and I get that. But this is two things here. The first thing is there was no evidence. And I think Chilcot taught us some very important lessons about the evidence. I imagine it was him, but I haven't seen the evidence yet. Secondly, in terms of strategy, there is no strategy. You have religious wars raging across the Middle East. You have 15 years of the war on terror that has cost trillions and hundreds of thousands of lives, and nothing has happened so far. And in terms of international law, look, this is the key thing here. If you're going to bomb a country, after the Second World War, what we said as a nation is that we all got together and we said having big unilateral decisions made by big players on the world stage doesn't end too well. It ended in the Second World War. We don't want that. So we want the rule of law. And if you want to be able to look Russia and China and other countries in the eye, you have to operate within the rule of law. And that means that what Donald Trump did on Syria, although we might like it because we think it feels good, the reality is it set a bad precedent. And what we need to do is go through international institutions, because that ultimately is what the rule of law is about. And that's what we as a country have always said that we believe in.
How confident are you about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership on this issue? Because you resigned as Shadow Defence Secretary, didn't you? Because you disagreed with him. So now you're standing, supporting him for this, and on an issue like this, serious issue, Syria and whether we bomb Syria, North Korea and what happens there.
No, I didn't resign as Shadow Defence Secretary.
You didn't?
No.
You were kicked out?
I was shifted over. I was shifted over. But, look,
you were shifted over because you took the wrong line.
No,
yes.
I knew what the policy was on Trident. I read the auto cue, so I was quite aware of what the policy was. Look, I think the world needs more people like Jeremy Corbyn. There's a lot of brinkmanship going on at the moment. And quite frankly, when I heard the Defence Secretary Michael Fallon boasting about how he would launch a first nuclear strike on another country in a macho way. What does it come to in politics when a politician gets to boast about the fact that he's quite prepared to launch a first strike on innocent civilians that would kill tens of thousands of people? I think it's disgrace, and I think we need more peacemakers, less warmongers.
Woman in the middle there, in white, yes.
I think one of the most dangerous things about Donald Trump is the fact that his opinions and his morals are reaching people all over the world, and they're not particularly respectable morals, especially towards women, for instance. I think it's truly disgusting, his comments towards women and about them. And why aren't our politicians doing more to stand up against that and say, no, this is wrong, when instead we're being left to people like J.K. Rowling to tweet and say, call him up on it. Why aren't the people leading our country standing up against him?
Damien Green.
I think the last time I was on Question Time, it was actually just after he made some of his terrible wrong remarks, and I said so at the time, so I'm more than happy to repeat that. But come on, let's get a sense of perspective here. It sounds like, if you listen to the last 10 minutes of discussion, that Donald Trump is worse than Kim Jong-un. He is a democratically elected leader of a country where, as he is discovering, there is the rule of law. There are independent institutions that mean that any American president has to obey the law. And America is a friendly democracy. And the idea that in any way you can equate that, because I think, let's take the question seriously. Who should we distrust more? Kim Jong-un is a dictator at the head of one of the world's most mad regimes that has starved many of its own people and is trying hard to develop a nuclear capacity with which it clearly wants to threaten its neighbours. There is no equation there. I think we have to be important. And Stephen raises the important point of Syria. And of course, any British government would look at individual situations as they develop. It is perfectly possible, it seems to me, that Assad is evil enough to use chemical weapons to kill tens of thousands of his own citizens if he thought he would get away with it. And frankly, if British or Western military power was used to save those tens of thousands of lives, I would think that was the morally right thing to do.
Joe Swinson. Joe Swinson.
Clearly, without doubt, the North Korean regime is horrific and appalling. But I think there's a difference in terms of actually how much global power the American president and Kim Jong-un have got in the world. And that is what makes me so worried about President Donald Trump, because we've been used to a situation where America has helped to keep the world order, has been a very positive role in world affairs, and we now have this very unstable situation where actually people can't predict what the president is likely to do. I think this issue really does boil down to international law, because actually, the chemical weapon attack in Syria was one that I do think required a response. I think we have that line in the sand very clearly drawn since after the First World War, that chemical weapon attacks are absolutely unacceptable. But what worried me about it was that it was unilateral action. It wasn't done through the international community. It wasn't even as if those approaches were tried. It was just done unilaterally by President Trump. And that is very worrying. And so when I hear our Foreign Secretary saying it would be very hard to say no, I just get shivers, because I know what it's been like in the past when we have acted as America's poodle in terms of military affairs in the world. And I marched against the Iraq War in 2003, and we don't want to go back to that situation. There might be circumstances where, such as to prevent chemical weapon attacks, you might be able to have that discussion, but it needs to be done through those proper international channels. And to have the Foreign Secretary, coming out with, looking up his thesaurus for medieval insults for the leader of the Labour Party and then just, blithely saying, oh, well, it'd be hard to say no to President Donald Trump. Frankly, I find that absolutely terrifying.
On the Lib Dem
Camilla. I want to try and get one more question in, Camilla. If you could be brief on this one, that would be a help.
Well, it's a great question because, of course, Kim and Trump are both utterly unpredictable. So there is a sort of horrifying similarity, and we are at this bizarre stage of history, aren't we? But, of course, Trump is democratically elected, and he does lead a country which has long been our ally, and it is still our ally, even if it's led by somebody that many of us feel slightly uncomfortable with. I actually don't agree with Stephen that North Korea and Syria are similarly complex. I think North Korea is somewhat more simple. And I also I'm just concerned about the statements about investing in international development for Syria. Syria is in total crisis. Tens of thousands of people are dying. And in 2013, what President Obama did was he backed away from his red line when he thought Assad had used chemical weapons because the British Parliament didn't support action. And Obama was able to use that as an excuse not to confront Assad. And I do actually think that the use of chemical weapons is horrendous, and it has to be, I'm afraid, a red line.
On the point I've been directly criticised on is, firstly, North Korea is an abomination. It's the best way to deal with it. Secondly, and this was on the Lib Dem watch and on your watch, in Libya, we spent twice as much bombing that country as we did on reconstruction afterwards, under your watch.
All right,
that led to a failed state, which has led to many of the problems that we see in the gaps in the Mediterranean today, exacerbating the refugee and humanitarian crisis.
I've got one more question. We've hardly got time, but I'd like to raise it. Simon Warren has it. Simon Warren, can we have your question?
Is it right for Theresa May to maintain a 12 million foreign aid budget when services such as the NHS are so clearly in need of additional funding?
12 billion foreign aid budget, the 0.7. And I don't know, we've only got 3 minutes left. It's the problem with question time. But is she right to maintain that when the NHS and other places need additional funding? You go on this, and we have to be quite swift on it.
Yes, she is. And I think ultimately this isn't, again, it's like the pensioners and young people. It's not a choice between playing our part in ensuring that we have a better, cleaner, fairer world where the developing nations, many of these countries are countries where many people in this audience and at home have come from. And our country has benefited very much throughout its history from the developing world and empire. And I think what we're doing here is actually part of that long-term strategy. We're actually making sure that these countries can come up and join the developed world and actually stop poverty, stop those things which can create terrorism. So I think actually the 0.7% is right and proper, and I think we can afford both that and to have a decently funded public services like the NHS and elderly
Do you
care.
agree with that, Camilla?
I started my career as an aid worker, and I have a lot of friends still in aid, and I believe that aid can do absolutely marvellous things. I also believe that having a fixed budget is a recipe for some misuse of funds, because the agencies know they've got the money and they don't always spend it wisely, and I'm afraid we still need to get an awful lot better at spending it.
OK. Thank you for being brief. Joe, if you could be brief too, because I can't go for more than 2 minutes. Yes.
We should maintain it. It is for every £100 that this country has in wealth, it is spending 70 pence. And I think we have that responsibility more broadly as well as within our own country. And I'm very proud that it was my Liberal Democrat colleague, Michael Moore, who brought in the bill to force the government to stick to the 0.7% every year.
Simon Warren, who asked the question, what do you think?
As the saying goes, charity begins at home. £12 billion is a lot of money, and every week you're hearing about crisis after crisis in the NHS.
12 billion?
12 billion.
Yes.
It's quite simply, we need more in the NHS. We don't need to be exporting it to other
Damien
countries.
Green.
Yes, I'm glad there's so much consensus that the Prime Minister has said that we will stick to
not consensus
the
from him.
0.7% target around here. And I think, I mean, you're quite right, of course, charity begins at home, but charity doesn't need to end at home. And that we can afford, we can continue to afford to put the extra money we're putting into the NHS and other public services only because we have a strong enough economy to do that. And that's one of the key questions facing this country over the next few weeks is, do we want to preserve the strong economy that allows us to do these good and generous things, or do you want to put it at risk?
Stephen Gethings.
Look, this election's about the kind of country that we want to be. Yes, I think we have international obligations that we should have, and international development spend is a good use of money. It's also a fraction of the amount of money we're about to spend on weapons of mass destruction. There's a clear choice there.
OK. You have 10 seconds, the man at the back in spectacles. I know you've been trying to get in.
Thank
Quickly.
you very much. My arm's been dying all evening. I mean, I think it's all well and good to have a foreign aid budget. And you mentioned that we might be a poodle in the face of America. One way we maintain our status as a world power is by having an effective nuclear deterrent. And I can't see us remaining a serious world power, as long as Jeremy Corbyn is potentially going to become Prime Minister and get rid of the whole lot.
OK, all right. You raised something we didn't get to very deftly as a last hurrah from you, but thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry, we do have to stop. Our hour's up. We're going to be in Wigan next week, as I said earlier. Among those on the panel, the Shadow Business Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey, and Leanne Wood, the leader of Plaid Cymru. And the week after that, we're going to be in Edinburgh. So Wigan or Edinburgh, on the screen there is the website address and the number to call, 0330 123 9988. If you're listening on 5 Live, of course, this debate goes on until 1 in the morning, question time, extra time. But here, my thanks to this panel, to all of you who came here to the Union Building in Oxford. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
on the upcoming election next. Andrew Neil and guests are waiting with This Week.
This is all Ros. She's trying to frame me.
We're still after you, Mara.
This is the final push. We cannot fail.
He sent you, didn't he?
You're expecting someone else?